Tim Goldstein, autistic adult, and your host for Life in a Neurotypical Universe, where we take a look at life from the perspective of an autistic adult. Today we have a very special episode of Life in the Neurotypical Universe. In this episode, I'm actually chatting with my friend Chris Turner from Project Enterprise Coaching down in Australia. And it was actually just a call that we had to catch up and talk with each other. But I decided I would tape it and record it because we usually talk about some pretty fun and interesting things. And out of this whole thing, I was able to produce 3 very high quality, very interesting podcasts. So come join Chris and I, take a look into life in a neurotypical universe.
I think it's harder when you've got something to anticipate as well, though. You know, Christmas is like a birthday. You know, you got something that you're really looking forward to. So what do they say? Like a watched kettle never boils.
Right. Well, see, I was never a fan for the birthday part because my birthday's 2 days before Christmas.
Oh man, that's unlucky.
It gets even crazier. My parents actually forged my birth certificate.
Mm.
You know, this was obviously we're both a little older, so this was back in the day when that was not a difficult thing to do, because they wanted me to get into school a year earlier. And,
right.
Most school systems have some cutoff of you have to be, in the U.S., 5 is the age, but it varies all over by school system as to whether it's September 1st you have to be 5 years old or whether it's
the date,
December or whatever. And the date in the school system that we moved into right around that time was December 1st to start. And I have 2 older brothers, and they're 5 and 6 years older. And my mother was wanting to get me out of the house. And of course, I've been hanging out with older brothers. We grew up on a farm, so they were the only other kids around. And they actually forged my birth certificate and changed the 12 to an 11 and made it 11/23. Now, where it gets funny is that's actually my wife's birthday, November 23rd. Right. And we got married on her birthday. And then when she found out it really wasn't my birthday, she kicked me off of it and put me back in December.
I thought you were just trying to ride the coattails of, that magic day.
Yep.
Lie.
Yeah, it's one of those things you just got to learn to deal with.
So someone raised a question with me recently, and it was around, I think the gist of it was really about teaching or helping neurodiverse people be more neurotypical so they can fit into neurotypical environments as a first phase of supporting greater employment.
Well, here's my response to that one. And again, I don't know necessarily all the nuances in your country. And for those of us listening in, when I say to your country, Chris is down in the world down under as far as we're concerned up here. And I don't know, what do you call us up here? The world on top? I don't know. Chris is from down in Australia, and I'm up here in the U.S. So that's why, I'm not sure quite how all the cultural pieces necessarily fit together. If we look at the LBGT, plus community, and there used to be, a big thing that was, called gay conversion therapy, where, you tried to convert them from being gay into being, not gay. And, we've outlawed it in a huge amount of the states because, you're trying to change who a person is at their innate level of who they are. And to me, that's exactly the same thing. If you try and take an autistic person and turn them into a neurodiverse person, that's just like gay conversion therapy. That's not who they are. That's not how they think. That's not how they process. It really gets down to That's essentially what ABA comes down to. Good. Let's just teach them to.
In its originals.
Yeah, let's just teach them to. We'll use Pavlovian primary conditioning, and we're going to teach them to act like something else. You didn't change who they are. You just imposed some actions upon them, but you didn't change who they are. And trying to change who they are, to me, again, that's the whole thing I hate with the ABA thing is, what are you really telling this child all the way along? You're telling them you're no good, you need to be like something else. And then we wonder why the average age of death of somebody with autism is 38 years old. Because they're killing themselves, because we've told them for 18 years that are worthless and useless and not the right kind of human.
Yeah, this is, so I struggle with that idea, and I think, because as we were saying before, I think there is value in helping everybody understand the other side. So yes, for a neurodiverse person who's looking to find work, helping them understand how the bulk of that workforce, that workplace is likely to think and operate, how their social structures might flow, the social norms and expectations that are generally typical. I mean, there's always, specifics at every workplace is slightly different. They have their own unwritten rules and the like. But having an appreciation that is the case, and having an appreciation of how someone else may perceive them and how they may perceive their actions and their words and the like. It's not about asking them to do it, be different, but just to say, look, when you do these sorts of things, someone else may see it this way. So it's not a surprise when it happens, but equally going to the other side and saying, when this person says, does, acts this way, this is what it does not mean generally, and this is what it probably means. These are the things that are going to work for them, not work for them, and to help both sides understand that there are those differences, and then kind of go chuck them together. Now, guys, you've got to work it out. With some help, but it's just to say, like, it's not, you don't need, like, neither side needs to do something different necessarily. I think if you start with that view, that just appreciate that they're different, and there may be some perception challenges because I don't necessarily fully understand, maybe it's a lot less painful as you get into it, rather than saying the autistic person or the dyslexic person or whoever it might be, say, guys, you've now got to be normal, because that's what everyone else expects you to be. They expect you to be normal. Because I think you're adding so much stress to them to then trying to do that. You're doing, as you say, like the self-esteem piece must be horrendous, because the undercurrent is saying you're not good enough. And then the value you're potentially foregoing by not allowing that person to just be themselves and bring their best, well, why would you even bother with it then? Don't hire them.
Right. I like to put that, I agree 100% with your point, and I kind of condense it down to a little saying. And the way I put it to people is, you are perfectly fine as who you are. You don't need to change. You don't need to be a different person. We don't need to change who you are. But you do need to learn a few tools to interact with this particular thing. Just like if I wanted to go work on my automobile, I'm going to need some tools to do that. That doesn't change who I am as a human. It just means that I've learned to use tools to interact with situations that are different. And unfortunately, it's not taught that way of, you're perfectly fine who you are. But you do need to learn to use a few tools correctly in the right situations. That's not changing you. That's just saying, hey, you got to learn a couple new skills because you want to do more things. I want to start a new career. I got to go learn a new skill. And it still values you as a person, as a person, there's nothing wrong with you as a person. Now, if you're neurodiverse and want to go play in the neurotypical world, okay, you got to learn a few tools. And some of the tools are, here, learn the tribe model and think about that when you go to deal with somebody. And guess what? You'll probably be following, the neurotypical path much better. But we didn't change who you are at all. You're still the same person. As opposed to the ABA approach, geez, can't they get closer to being like neurotypicals? No, they shouldn't be
Yeah.
closer to being neurotypicals. They should have tools that allow them to interact appropriately. Just like the neurotypicals should have appropriate tools to interact with people that are different from them, too.
Well, and you think about it, I've seen a lot more in the last sort of 10, 15 years because it didn't exist when I started working, as you were saying before, but soft skills training.
Yes.
Like soft skills, I don't think there was even a word for it when I started working. You learnt any skills you learnt were generally just technical skills. There wasn't really much else beyond that. Yeah, but there's a lot more focus on that sort of stuff, and it's negotiation skills and your time management skills and all these other sorts of things that you do use to operate more effectively in a work context, but working with people. And a lot of that, when you talk about like the influencing and negotiation type skills, it's dealing with other people, and that's stuff that we're teaching people, all people, more and more often now. So it's not something that, well, you need to teach social interaction skills to autistic people. You kind of got to teach social interaction skills to everybody.
Exactly.
Everyone can benefit from better understanding how to deal with somebody else. And a lot of that is around a minimum level of empathy and putting yourself in their shoes, understanding the other person's perspective and working forward from there.
I say that you don't
Yeah.
even necessarily have to understand the other person's perspective. You just need to. Again, it's the electrical light switch
Well, you
thing.
understand that they are going to have a
Bingo.
different
Right.
perspective.
Right. You just have to be
That-
recognizing that there will be a difference there. You don't have to understand why. You don't have to understand exactly what they are. You just have to recognize
no.
that there will be a difference, and you're going to have to figure out some methodology. And it's not by changing who you are to interact with that person. It,
No, this is it, right? So yeah, and this is it's come up a couple of times. This whole theory that people can compartmentalize their lives. I don't know. This is me anyway. I don't buy into it. Is that I can be one person at work and one person at home. There's someone else at home. And work is work and home is home, and I can draw a line, and they're all separate things. And maybe I'm just not smart enough for that, but I don't see how you can effectively, honestly do that. So I think asking people to just be yourself, but understand how can you find ways to create that intersect with other people. It's just a generally useful skill. Like you can't to ask them to be somebody else so that they can interact more effectively with somebody else. I think it's just
right,
disingenuous.
and we don't do that. As you say, in the work world now, there's a huge amount of teaching of soft skills across all industries. And when we teach the soft skills in those settings, we don't tell the person that you're no good, you're not competent, you need to be doing it this way. We tell them, here's the new skill that you can use, and here's how you apply it, and here's the situations you use it in. We don't demean who you are, we just say, here's some additional skill and tools. But suddenly when we turn to somebody who's neurodiverse, it's, oh, we need to change who you are, and you're not good enough, and you're not right. So why is it that teaching the same skill to one group is adding a tool to their box, but they can stay who they are, and teaching the same skill to a different group is, oh, they have to be different. They got to change.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a distinction.
Right. And if we were just to apply the exact same model that we use in the work world for teaching soft skills, which is it's an additional tool. It's not that you're bad or you're wrong or whatever. Maybe you just never had the chance to learn these things somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you may not be as competent at it today, but again, yeah, as you say, if no one's given you the tools, shown you how to use them, it's fair enough.
Which is why I wrote the tips to understanding how to be neurodiverse, because nobody's given autistic people the tools in the way they think to understand what happens when you flip the switch. Not to understand why it happens, just to understand what happens when you flip the switch.
Yep. I'm gonna Yeah, that's good. I remember the guy's name about the speaking, the voice coach guy.
Yeah, with Roger.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they were really good. I got part way through it, but
what did you? I guess what did you like?
I think the videos. I think that was. I don't remember having any issue with that. I thought that was really good. I thought what was very interesting was the your own self recordings
Oh,
and just providing that. Eh, I think because it gave a level of weight to the effectiveness of that coaching, and I guess like any coaching, there's also there's an element of implementation. So I think you obviously put a lot of effort into that side of it, but there's that practice piece. But I think it was interesting to see that because some of the stuff at the beginning, he talks a lot about this breathing, and it's like, oh, it sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo. Like, really? But but then having something that gives it that concrete edge to go, actually, okay, look, this guy did this, and it made a big difference in the way, he changed his presentation style. So I thought that was interesting.
what we're discussing is I had studied with a vocal coach that's out of Hollywood. His name is Roger Love, and he has a very unique technique to teach people to speak and communicate better. And it's based totally upon singing because his background is singing. And I actually call his technique, I've kind of renamed it and call it emotional speaking. Because what he's trying to teach you to do is to weave that melody like you have in music into your voice. So everything you say is delivered with emotion wrapped around it. Now, I'm autistic, of course. I didn't normally speak that way. And the piece you were referring to of the video was I took a video from probably 3 or 4 years before I had studied with Roger. And it was a product demo video I was doing for a company I owned. And then I took a piece of video after I had one lesson with Roger. And then I took a piece of video after 2 years or so studying with him. And that's the one where Chris was mentioning how dramatic the difference is between before I got training and after I got training. I think it's a very important area because, us people on the spectrum tend to have very flat affect and we tend to have very monotone voices. And the effect I have found by now changing my voice, which many people don't believe you can change your voice, but you can change your voice just as well as you can change your clothes if you want to. What I have found is people engage much more now than they used to, because before I was speaking from an Aspie standpoint of logic only. Now I'm delivering with the logic that channel of emotion that they're expecting to hear, that before they had to make up for me because I didn't have any of it in my speech. So they just had to make up what they thought would be the right emotion for me. So I guess, what have you seen? I mean, you're obviously coaching quite a few people and dealing with many of us on the spectrum. What have you seen as far as the vocal and how people, react in general to us not having a lot of emotion in our voice normally?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think about some of the people that I've dealt with, and everyone honestly, everyone is different. And I've found it's not something that affects everybody, and not everybody in the same way. So there's a few people that I work with that are you wouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't be the first thing you'd go to, right? It wouldn't be the verbal delivery wouldn't be a cue or a clue. Whereas for some, it can be a real standout, and it's not always. I've found not always a that monotone flat. It can be like highly variable, but yeah, almost like the inverse of what you would expect. They can sound overly excited when they're not, or it's going up and down, almost seemingly at random, and and volume is just, all over the place. And it's kind of, wow, and it can almost be just as confronting as, I think, as someone who is just like dead, flat, boring, just speaking like a robot at you. And it's just been delivered 100 miles an hour, in the same sort of way. It's kind of, I think people don't really know how to deal with it. Not understanding what's behind it, So
I think, my theory on it, and, I, of course, have some interesting different theories on some of these things, is that communication amongst humans and spoken communication, there's really three modes that are going on that most people, being most meaning neurotypicals, are expecting. And one, of course, is the words. We all know that. But the other two are the tonality of the voice, the overall sound. Like you say, when you had somebody, monotone is bad, but equally bad is jumping around in a pattern that doesn't match normal human patterns.
Yes,
and then the third part, of course, is just the overall, the body, the facial expressions and such. And I know what happens very often, I've seen, is both watching people who are autistic speaking and dealing with other people and myself, is if you don't provide the other channels besides the words, because we tend to concentrate on the words and use the very literal words that express what we think. But if you don't provide those other two channels, people are so used to receiving those channels that they make them up for you. And they usually get them wrong because you're giving them all the totally wrong cues. Like you said, you're jumping all over, so what's that cue? Or you're totally monotone, so how do they know whether, are you just bored and not engaged in the conversation? Or what's going on? So they just make it up and they try and figure it out. And usually what they figure out is not what's really going on.
No, I think that's exactly right. And, I don't think it's a trait of autistic people specifically, or even neurodiverse people specifically. I think there's just some people who, it's not natural. That finding that way, and I think you can get it. There's cultural variations to that as well.
Oh, very much so. I agree there. Yeah, culturally, very much.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Like, I know I've got friends who are Vietnamese, and they laugh because they were over at our place for dinner just a couple of weeks ago, right? And the girl's mum rang her, and they were on the phone, and we were kind of chuckling. And we're only listening to half the conversation, obviously, but we're chuckling because it sounded like they're having a row. And she hangs up the phone and she says, "Oh yeah, Mum just wanted some help with some stuff." And she sounds like you guys were at each other. She said, "Oh no, that's just the way we speak." That's Vietnamese for you, sort of thing. And it's not. It's kind of partially the language, and it's partially the cultural norms. And then for us listening to it, it sounds angry and aggressive, but it's just different.
That's such a wonderful example of what actually happens with people who are autistic. I'm a believer that having autism essentially means we're from a different universe. We have a different culture. We have a different way to communicate. I haven't seen when you get a whole bunch of us on the spectrum together, we all get along pretty darn well. We don't have much problems. The problem happens is when we have to engage with the neurotypical culture, that exactly like the conversation you talked about. We might be going at it with each other, the neurodiverse people going at it over something because we're debating the fact. I mean, this is what I think. This is what you think. Let's get it out and figure out, maybe I'll learn something from you. You'll learn something from me. But somebody listening in thinks we're arguing with each other. That assumption then is, oh gosh, those two people are troublemakers. And if it's in the work environment, and we all know where that ends up going to.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because I try to use the whole thinking about me. You say a different universe. I keep it on the same planet, and just say someone from another culture. But it's that same thing. I think there's an intrinsic similarity, I think, between certainly with autistic people, I'm not sufficiently au fait, I think, with other types of neurodiverse people generally enough to say it, but certainly seen it with autistic people is that it is a lot like just meeting someone from another country that you're not particularly familiar with. People have, like you say, there's differences around social norms on communication, but personal space, the way what people's fundamental beliefs or values might be. It's people are just different. It doesn't mean that the way that they communicate, act, or value things is wrong. It's just different to yours, and I think it's a very similar. And when you think about like talking to people here around, and this is in the university context, right? So foreign students here, and we get a lot of students, particularly from the India and Sri Lanka, Pakistan, those sorts of places. And Southeast and Asia. And a lot of those foreign students have very similar issues, I think, in universities that a lot of the neurodiverse students have around socialization, social isolation, the challenges that they have with trying to find work because there's a language difference, there's some social norms differences. People don't really understand them in the same way that they may understand a more local person. So I think there's some very common similarities around the challenges they face as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I like the kind of analogy you have of the two different cultures. But the reason that I say two different universes is because I think when most people meet somebody and they're trying to, get a model, a picture in their head of who is this person, they start with themselves because it's the only life experience that you know. And then they try and say, okay, they're like me, but, and then they start adding the differences in. The problem with doing that with somebody who is neurodiverse is being neurodiverse means that everything you perceive and process is coming through different channels and coming through different ways and getting different input. It makes it so different that if you start from like me, but you can never get to the way an autistic person is, just like I can't get to the way a neurotypical person is by going like me, but.
Yeah, okay.
To me, it's similar. We're both guys, so it'd be similar to talking about females. We could both go study all of the things there are to study, go to the best universities to, take women's studies, know everything in the world about it, and still not have a clue what the experience of being a woman is like. And I think the exact same thing goes on, and I think what throws it off so bad is because people start with, oh, like me, but, instead of starting with, they're nothing like me, now let's figure it out how to build this bridge. And that's why I say another universe.
Yeah, so it's kind of like flipping that like me, but to not like me, but. Yes. Almost like, trying to find where are the similarities rather than where are the differences. Yes. Is what I'm kind of
getting. Yeah, they start.
Because there are going to be similarities.
Oh, definitely. There's definitely going to be some similarities, and there's definitely going to be differences. And I think you have it. You nailed it exactly. It's which side are you focusing on? If you're focusing on how are they similar to me, I'm sure you've read my article, the curse of the high functioning, the uncanny valley of autism. With the concept being that the closer I can act as if I was a neurotypical, the worse the reaction is when something happens and they realize I'm not. And because they're looking for the similarities, people tend to come up with, oh, well, they're like me, because they looked for similarities. And what they didn't look for was the differences. So one of those differences becomes obvious. The reaction is, almost a total rejection because you don't fit this picture that they had in their head anymore.
That's interesting, actually. It's a good point because I think I've been working with a young guy recently who had got his first job out of university and did it all by himself. It was all fantastic. It was awesome. And then it sort of fell apart a little bit, or fell apart a lot. And I think what you're saying is exactly what was happening there. I think firstly there wasn't a conversation around the fact that he might be different. So it was a little unknown right off the bat. But even once it was known, I think there was that real focus on the identifiable similarities and the like, and not being able to appreciate how different the differences can be, because they're not always obvious. They don't always present themselves, and yet when they do, sometimes I find that they can be on the surface subtle enough that it can be hard to work out why is it such a problem. Why is it actually so different when it superficially it doesn't seem that different? I've got a client that I work with, and lots of people say they have trouble with directions. Can't really read a map, or you might say flippantly, "Oh, I don't know my left from my right." Whereas this person truly cannot tell left from right.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at that at all. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I know which my right is supposed to be, and I know which my left is supposed to be. So I can tell the difference, and I wouldn't say it's every day, but frequently enough, once, couple times a month kind of range, where maybe I'm giving directions and I'm pointing in the direction, that kind of thing. And I'll say, go right, but I'm pointing left. Now, I know the difference from right and left, but they get jumbled up somehow, and I'm pointing left, but I'm saying right. And
so whereas I think for this lady, it's not once a month. It's pretty much always.
But I guess I can say I can relate to it because I do it myself, and it's the strangest thing because I know in my brain I know that I mean right being that way. And for some reason, I'm pointing this way and saying right. My brain's saying the right thing, and my body's going the wrong way. So I understand exactly. Just fortunately for me, it's not so frequently that it gets me in trouble.
Yeah, but it's one of those little things, and it can be. I think people around often struggle to comprehend why that would be a challenge and how that is a challenge. And you can easily overlook the little things. So she can get into trouble, or not trouble, but have problems when someone's guiding like a virtual presentation, and they might be saying, so they're doing a screen share, and it's over a video call sort of thing, and I'll say, go to the top left corner. She's like, I know it's at the top. Top and
right, that part's
fine.
Easy.
Which side? Click in the box on the right. Oh my God, there's 4 boxes on here. Which one am I clicking? It's just those little things that then become stressful, and it creates anxiety. It's just but it's the little. This is what I mean about sometimes it's the subtle differences that superficially appear subtle, but they can actually be quite big and quite problematic if there's not that true understanding around it. So
I think that what happens around that is the surface part. It's like an iceberg, really. The surface part that they're seeing is subtle. But what they don't understand is, how's the person think? How do they process? How do they perceive that's causing that little piece you're seeing? And without understanding that what's underneath, what that causation is, you end up with people, I'm imagining she ends up with people all the time saying, no, it's the other way. And their thought process is, what's the matter with you that you can't tell your right from your left? That's what's going through their head. And at that point, they
no
diminish, in their minds, the intelligence of this woman.
Yeah, that's right.
In my IT professional life, I train people from, the heavy duty techs all the way through the senior level executives. And, you have to come across as a certain amount of expertise to, keep those groups together and do that. And when you do something such as tell them go to the top left of the screen and you really mean the top right, it is a little undermining for your credibility if you do it a couple times too many.
Yeah.
And, it's not that, like you say, it's not that it's a big, huge thing. It's those little things. And if you add up enough of those little things, people start wondering about you.
That's it. If they don't know and don't understand.
Right. Yeah. That the knowing and understanding is really the key. That awareness.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I mean, if you know, for instance, my wife, she used to work at one point for one of the major cable companies here in the U.S. And she had I guess it was like a director level, so 2 levels above her. And he was, there's not much more way to put it from the stories I've heard than he was a really tremendous jerk. And he lived in his office all the time. He very rarely came out. When he came out, he never socialized with people. And he, just came off as a jerk all the time. Now, though, after I'd been diagnosed with autism and she's learned quite a bit about it, she looks back on it and says, I should have just laughed at it and never let it bother me. The guy was obviously on the spectrum, which makes sense. He came out of the engineering field of cable TV. But, that's the thing, was that awareness. At the time, she wasn't aware, so she took it as being, this guy is a jerk. He's out to cause problems for everybody. He's, all the negative things you could think of somebody who, in a higher management level, basically locks herself in the office and never communicates with anybody. But once she understood now what it is, looking back, she would have handled it completely different and not been offended by him, but simply accepted that, okay, in his mental process, the emotion part really isn't what he's thinking. He's thinking about telling me the right words.
Yeah.
So definitely an area that, we'll say, causes challenges for us from time to time. We hope that you've enjoyed another episode of Life in a Neurotypical Universe. Please, if you enjoyed this, share it with your friends. Go take their phone and subscribe them. Heck, it will help us all out. If you want to know more about neurodiversity or have any questions for me, you can reach me at my website, timgoldstein.com, where I'll be more than glad to help you as best I can to navigate through the neurotypical universe.